Welcome to Practical Talk Time. I'm Sandy Robel, the host for the show, which is titled Beyond Reality. And we have Barbara DeLong back with us. And she will be talking about UFOs and also how it impacts us spiritually. And again, welcome back to the show, Barbara. I love having you on. You're such a wealth of information. And I know the last show we just did, you said it was too short. You could speak for hours, which I'm sure you can.
Well, you know, it's I have opinions, and sometimes I have facts that back them up. But yeah, I think the topics you pick, though, are topics that are so near and dear to my heart that it's very easy to expound upon them.
Mm-hmm. And usually when we think of UFOs, we think of the technology, like what type of spacecraft, what type of people might be inside. And you also look at it from a spiritual standpoint. And I think you've mentioned like the Bible, the Vedas. Can you explain a little bit for our audience, like, you know, starting out, how would you view this from a spiritual point of view?
Well, I think, first of all, UFOs have been with us since the beginning of time. And it's been something that as a species we've been conscious of since the beginning of time. In the Bible, they are mentioned all over the place. They're rapidly spinning, glowing objects that ascend and descend, and they're all over the Bible as far as being something that was a very common thing that happened. So. It's there. Yes, you're right. The technology is something that certainly, as a people, we would be interested in. But the reality is, I think UFOs have a more spiritual connotation to them than they do, a technical one like where we got Velcro or stuff like that. I do believe that they are trying to help us to evolve consciously. They're trying to touch us in places that store wisdom and knowledge that we have that we've carried through time. I think they remind us that we're not alone, that we are a part of a community, but only a very small part, and we are not the know-all, end-all. You know, we're not the master race by any means, and so I think that UFOs trigger when we see them, when we experience them. It's like a wake-up call. It's like they trigger something inside of us that we remember. We remember sometimes dreams. And I think the thing that everybody who has seen a UFO, sort of has to say, yeah, that's true. You're not frightened by them. You open your consciousness to the possibility of so much else that's out there in the universe, and everyone that I ever talked to that has experienced the UFOs has the same feeling. It's a gentle feeling, it's a calm feeling, it's a protective feeling. One of the circumstances we didn't talk about was the 1997 Phoenix Lights event where
Phoenix, Arizona,
where thousands and thousands of people watched these lights move along a straight line, and there were pictures of them, and there were cameras out there, and none of our military was ever mustered to go after them, and tens of thousands of people saw them, and an actress, Lynn Katai, who is also a doctor, took pictures of them. And her pictures became a documentary that was just fabulous, and it's out there. It's called The Phoenix Lights. And Patrick and I had her on his radio show talking about it on the anniversary of when it happened and the anniversary of when the documentary came out. And I spoke with her afterwards, and I said, okay, I've read your book. You've thrown all of the buzzwords in here that say that there was something spiritual that went on. And she said, yes, and she thought it was very funny that I caught it, and you see one, and your turn to your life takes a very gentle yet subtle turn to a more humanitarian focus on life. You want to serve humanity. You want to give back. You want to share information, and you look at all the people that have seen them, and all of them seem to have been just very subtly moving in a different direction, and they seem to have a different level of consciousness,
And
level
you
of
picked
awareness.
that up in her book when you read it.
Sure. And
Do you think most people would pick that up, or do you think it's just that you're a little bit more aware?
I think that she was so obvious with it that almost anybody would pick it up. But if you're reading her book, you're looking for UFO stuff. You're not looking for the spiritual stuff. She spoke about going to an Indian tribe that was very near where the UFOs came into the line of sight. And when she asked them about it, they all laughed at her because they said the sky people have been coming and going here for generations. And it was kind of an accepted thing that they were there, they were watchers. And I think that what we're seeing is a greater presence within the human community, so that the more we get used to it, the more casual we are about the whole experience, and the more open we are to possibly growing up a little bit as far as a race goes.
Do you think we'll be seeing more of these UFOs?
I think they've always been out there. I think that we are more conscious of them, and so yeah, I think you'll see more sightings. Hudson Valley has a lot of sightings because of all the chambers and the stone walls they have there. I mean, there are areas in this country where the sightings are just so frequent, it's beyond belief. And I think there's that sense of it's nothing to be afraid of. It's something to be excited about, because it's a reminder to us, among other things, that we can ascend to that level of consciousness. We can ascend to that place where we can become one with another part of ourselves. And I do believe that we are, in some ways, their children.
I know that in the other show that we have just done, and you just alluded to Patrick, who was your late husband, and I'd like you to tell the audience a bit about his background, which I find fascinating. Not what I would think of someone being interested in UFOs.
Well, he, at a very early age, went to seminary for to enter the ministry for the Baptist Church, and chose not to actually be ordained, but rather went into the Navy. He never finished the 9th grade, and yet he was the foremost expert on UFOs in the Bible in the country.
How did he get into the seminary if he never finished 9th grade?
They didn't require a high school degree, certificate.
Oh,
He went,
I would have.
I would have thought so too.
Yes, yeah.
But he was a very unique man. He knew he from the very early age was study. He knew the Bible back and forth, up and down. And he after his time in the service, he decided to look into the Giza Plateau. He was fascinated with it, so he researched it a great deal. And somebody sent him to a passage in the Bible, and I can't quote exactly what it was, but it said something about, God had directed them to build a pillar in the middle of Egypt and on the border, and, how did you figure, that's how they put the Great Pyramid, and how did you figure that? And the only way you could figure it was Upper and Lower Egypt, and so it sent him, into looking into the original translations, where all of the Bible stuff comes from. King James Version is something put together by King James. So he went back to the original texts, the original languages, and he went through the Bible, and he sort of researched all of the words that go back to the original texts, and to find out that, among other things, everywhere you see the word heaven in the Bible, they really mean sky. So if in all the places you put sky instead of heaven, they're talking about things flying in the sky. And if things are flying in the sky, then it just sent him on a search to what really was the Bible talking about. And it came about that it is a wonderful book that explains UFO experiences 2,000 years ago, and sometimes even longer than that ago.
And what is the title of that book?
It would be Bible UFO. It would, let's see. Yeah, it's the Bible UFO. And it's his book is just an explanation as to, and it quotes you chapter and verse. It explains it all, where what is said and what it means, and it was fascinating for me to learn that, among other things, it's off the topic, but the element of Antichrist does not ever occur in the Bible, not even in Revelations. So it's sort of like, we have taken the Bible and we have warped it tremendously in religion. The religious institutions have sort of warped it to fit their own purposes. And I'm not going to trash religion, because I do believe it's very important. But let's face it, Christianity is something that Constantine and his mother sort of created themselves. They made it a religion as opposed to a way of life, which were the preachings of Jesus. So it's sort of like everything that we believe to be carved in stone actually isn't.
Depends who writes the book and makes the rules. And
Yes.
I know when I've had discussions with Usha, and you look at the religious writings, but nothing in depth that we've done, but there are very many similarities.
Oh, yeah.
And many of the other religions are much older than Christianity.
And every major religion, even those that don't have a written tradition, goes back to the Golden Rule. And that's the foundation for every religion out there. If you take it all back, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, I mean, they all go back to treat each other as you would like to be treated yourself. And that's the foundation for all major religions out there. So they all came from the same place. So there shouldn't be any argument between them.
There shouldn't be, but often there is.
Yes.
And I think it's a lot of it's cultural too, in the way that we're brought up. And yet I think when we get to talk to people that are brought up in other cultures, very often we find there can be many similarities.
Well, there are stories of...
In our own lives.
Sure.
Yes.
And if you look at the Great Flood, the Bible does report a flood, but so does every other major religion.
Yes.
And so do the Native Americans, talk of a great flood. And so you have the stories that are told from the cultures that are telling the stories.
So something must have happened if every culture has that. Do you have any beliefs about UFOs and Noah's Ark, or any thoughts about it?
I do believe that to some degree there is validity to it. Is it on Mount Ararat? I don't know. If you just logically look at it, it seems almost impossible to have gathered. A lot of the animals on the ark weren't even indigenous to that area of the country. So one would wonder if maybe it's telling a story about a UFO who brought genetic samples from another dimension and turned them loose on this plane. So
you wouldn't necessarily believe in Darwin's theory?
Well, you just said the big thing. It's a theory, and a theory is an unproven fact.
Right.
And just because it's the one that's written about the most doesn't make it real. I don't think they've ever proven it. They haven't found a missing link. So if that's not the case, then how did we get here?
And what do you think? How did we get here?
I think we were put here by those people who are flying around watching us evolve and laughing. Because they have to be laughing.
Well, if they're more evolved than we are, why would they put a species in that's less evolved?
I think that there's an old fable, and it's been around forever. And it talks about the gods deciding to create another, species. And they created this species in their own image. And in creating them in their own image, they realized too late that they had given them immortality, they had given them all of their powers, they had given them all of their wisdom, and yet this was a very young entity that they had created. And so they decided that they would take away the knowledge of the powers that being had and hide them someplace. And they got together, and it was a huge conference that probably went on for eons. And they kept saying, well, where are we going to hide the knowledge, the wisdom, the knowledge that they have, this wisdom? Mm-hmm. And somebody said, well, let's put it on the moon. They'll never get there. And they said, no, man is definitely going, he's curious. He'll find it. Well, somebody else said the deepest sea. No, he'll eventually go there too. And they went back and forth and up and down. And finally, a very old crone, and I say crone because it had to be a woman that figured it out, said, I will tell you where you can hide it, where mankind will never look. Hide it inside of him. Because he'll never look inside for the answers. He'll always look outside.
Oh.
And I think that's what happened. I think that they created us and then realized, they aren't, they have all of the power, but they don't have the wisdom, the knowledge, the compassion, the insight, the love that they need to ascend to where we are right now. So we're down here and we're evolving, we're growing. I believe in reincarnation, and I do believe that every time we reincarnate, there's another level of understanding, kindness, and love that we have access to. Some people, have a little bit more. They're able to see a little bit more and sense what's inside. But I think that, this is just my opinion, that we are their children, that they're waiting for us to grow up. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're even in puberty yet, to tell you. I don't think we're out of training diapers yet.
Really?
Yeah. No, I think we got a long way to go.
Well, even when you said there's all different levels, even intellectually there's all different levels.
Sure.
We're not all equal in that way, or even different abilities that we have.
But no, I think we all have the potential inside of us to do all of these wonderful things. But it's sort of like, on the cars in Europe, they have what they call a governor on a lot of the engines. They only let the engine go just so far, and then it stops them. And I think that we have governors on ourselves here. I think that there is something that prevents us from taking that power. Excuse me. And if you look at places like Machu Picchu and the Giza Plateau and Pumapunka, and you look at all of those amazing megalithic structures that are put together often without any sort of cement or anything, that had to be done by someone, and it sure wasn't done by us. So
some people think it's like electromagnetism that they had knowledge of that's been lost.
If it had been lost, we would have figured it out. But they had batteries back then, too. They've discovered batteries that go back to that time frame or even further.
Where are these batteries?
In museums.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, they've discovered batteries.
Oh, talking about museums, they were talking about, this is another program on a radio last night, about these huge people that were 9 to 11 feet tall, like giants, actually, and that they had found skeletons, and they were in museums, and the Smithsonian had come along and bought them all up, and they're hidden in the Smithsonian, that we can't see them. But I think in Peru, there's supposed to be some museum there that does have some of these skulls.
During during the 1800s, when we were clearing the West of all those primitive people out there and killing off all the Indians, the United States government found that in some of the skirmishes they had, in some of the wars they had, there were tribes of giants that were fighting alongside the Indians, and they were killed as well. And when they found that they had white skin, they collected all the bodies and sent them to the Smithsonian. Those are the bodies you're talking about. They are this is the 1800s now, the early 1800s, and those bodies are in the Smithsonian. They are hidden away from us because
I never heard of it till last night.
Giants did exist.
Well,
Giants
there's the
were
thing
real.
about Bigfoot. That's people I remember in the 1970s, going back that far, that people would say that they've seen Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. And then others, it was some man that said he was purposely making the, it's hard to tell what is actually true or not. It's so difficult.
Well, you've got Sasquatch, you've got the Yeti, you've got Bigfoot. There are creatures that are described to be large and you know, are out there in the wilderness, and sometimes they are in such, you know, such remote places that they must have survived. But the actual giants that they're talking about too, from the Bible, and this is really interesting, because the giants that they're talking about not only were huge, 12, 15 feet high, and of course there were giants in the Bible as well, but they had a couple of physical characteristics that were quite amazing. They had 6 digits on their hands and 6 toes on each feet. They had double rows of teeth, and they had often red hair and very pale skin. And there are people today that are still that are born with an extra digit, and some, you know, that come from that line. So that genetically speaking, giants are still very much out there.
First, I had heard about it, you know, that that there actually could be, you know, giants. Think of Jack and the Beanstalk, the
Right.
fairy tale. Yes.
But Goliath was a very real giant, and you know, Samson did slay him. He had a brother, and they talk about in the Bible about how large his bed was. There are, I can't remember how many tribes of giants in the Bible, but they're amazing. There are so many of them, and they do still today exist. There was a picture of when the old leader of Korea died, and they had the ceremony for him, and they had the troops standing in line and everything. There's one picture, and they have all these little men, and then suddenly there's this one great big man, and then there's all these little men. They still exist. They're out there.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating.
And I have a ton.
But why do you think they wouldn't make themselves known or come into more populated areas or into a city? Why would the giants stay secluded?
They probably wanted to be left alone, and I wouldn't blame them. There's a cave in Germany called the Brettenweier Cave, and in that cave during World War II, it was discovered in their bones, the skulls of which you could take a skull and you could put it over your own head. It was so big, and they had the double rows of teeth. And the government, you know, has closed off the Brettenweier Cave. But if you go onto my husband's website, BibleUFO.com, and you look into the Brettenweier Cave, and there's another website called CaveLore.com. It talks about these caves where these amazingly huge human beings were discovered, and governments are trying to keep it quiet and to keep it out of the public knowledge. In the 17, 18, 1900s, there have been giants that were dug up here in New England. And
oh, you're kidding.
No, I'm serious. There are newspaper articles that talk about, you know, how big they are and that they have double rows of teeth. And yeah, those I can send you. I have those write-ups from New England they're from the newspapers. They're out there.
Well, in one way, maybe I shouldn't be so surprised, because sometimes we hear things on the news, and you might hear them early in the morning mentioned once or twice, and they disappear. For some reason, they don't want to repeat it, and yet other things they repeat over and over and over again.
Well, look at Star Trek. When Star Trek came out, the very, very first season of it, you know, they had doors that opened and closed. They had their tricorders that flipped open and shut. I think that quite often when things like that occur, you know that it's telling you about something that is yet to come, because we all have these doors that open and shut, and we all have our cell phones that flip open like that. So I think the giants are something that have been out there forever, and I don't think they want to become a part. They don't want to be a sideshow. They want to live their lives in peace, and I don't blame them. Look what we do to people who don't fit in. We're not too kind.
True, but don't you think that the giants then would be multiplying more and more? That, you know, they'd become a greater number?
I don't think so. I think it's a genetic thing. And I think
That they would reproduce less frequently? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know for sure. I haven't spoken to a giant lately, but, you know.
Did you ever?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
But a lady did call into one of Patrick's shows that was sure she was a descendant of one of the tribes, and from the way she described herself and her family and their physical attributes, I would say that most probably they did, you know, cross-mingle with the general public, and that the gene is still out there. I think it's recessive, but I think it's still out there.
Right, and we do have some people that, on both ends. They could be the little people, very small or
Absolutely.
very tall, you know, extremely tall, but not 12 feet as far as I know. But
Be a heck of a basketball player.
well, in that case, I think the basket should be made higher. I always felt that that's not fair, that it should be in ratio to certain heights.
Yeah, but then you have your short people that are you know, what would you have, a separate basket for each player?
No, but within a range.
Okay.
You know, because the tall ones just take the, you know, they can just put the ball into the basket. A short person has a harder
But
time.
diversity is part of our culture, and, you know, we have to accept everybody for their shortcomings and their longcomings, and all get along.
Well, I think it should be like the weight of boxers, where they have different categories, different divisions.
Okay.
This has been fascinating, and it sounds like going to your late husband's website would have a lot of information.
Yeah, there's like 10,000 pages there,
And
yes.
I could see this would be quite controversial with many people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, because it kind of goes against what they believe, and but it's fascinating to hear all different viewpoints. I just love to do that.
Oh, absolutely.
And hear different stories, and you have to wonder. There's no way of proving or disproving it.
Well, I think the most important thing is that if you say stuff like that and it makes people think and it makes people research and it makes people learn, then you've served your purpose.
Right, and you've served your purpose in a wonderful show, Beyond
you.
Reality. And thank you to our guests out in the audience who have been watching this. And again, if you have any comments or suggestions, please email us at practicaltalktime@yahoo.com. Thank you for watching. Welcome to Practical Talk Time. I'm Sandy Robel, the host for the show, which is titled Beyond Reality. And we have Barbara DeLong back with us. And she will be talking about UFOs and also how it impacts us spiritually. And again, welcome back to the show, Barbara. I love having you on. You're such a wealth of information. And I know the last show we just did, you said it was too short. You could speak for hours, which I'm sure you can.
And there were pictures of them, and there were cameras out there, and none of our military was ever mustered to go after them. And tens of thousands of people saw them. And an actress, Lynn Katai, who is also a doctor, took pictures of them. And her pictures became a documentary that was just fabulous, and it's out there. It's called The Phoenix Lights. And Patrick and I had her on his radio show talking about it on the anniversary of when it happened and the anniversary when the documentary came out. And I spoke with her afterwards, and I said, okay, I've read your book. You've thrown all of the buzzwords in here that that say that there was something spiritual that went on, and she said yes, and she thought it was very funny that I caught it, and you see one, and your turn to your life takes a very gentle yet subtle that UFOs trigger when we see them, when we experience them. It's like a wake-up call. It's like they trigger something inside of us that we remember. We remember sometimes dreams. And I think the thing that everybody who has seen a UFO, sort of has to say, yeah, that's true. You're not frightened by them. You open your consciousness to the possibility of so much else that's out there in the universe, and everyone that I ever talked to that has experienced the UFOs has the same feeling. It's a gentle feeling, it's a calm feeling, it's a protective feeling. One of the circumstances we didn't talk about was the 1997 Phoenix Lights event where
Phoenix, Arizona.
Phoenix, Arizona, where thousands and thousands of people watched these lights move along a straight line. Well, it's I have opinions, and sometimes I have facts that back them up. But yeah, I think the topics you pick, though, are topics that are so near and dear to my heart that it's very easy to expound upon them.
Mm-hmm. And usually when we think of UFOs, we think of the technology, like what type of spacecraft, what type of people might be inside. And you also look at it from a spiritual standpoint. And I think you've mentioned like the Bible, the Vedas. Can you explain a little bit for our audience, like, starting out, how would you view this from a spiritual point of view?
Well, I think, first of all, UFOs have been with us since the beginning of time. And it's been something that as a species we've been conscious of since the beginning of time. In the Bible, they are mentioned all over the place. They're rapidly spinning, glowing objects that ascend and descend, and they're all over the Bible as far as being something that was a very common thing that happened. So it's there. Yes, you're right. The technology is something that certainly, as a people, we would be interested in. But the reality is, I think UFOs have a more spiritual connotation to them than they do, a technical one like where we got Velcro or stuff like that. I do believe that they are trying to help us to evolve consciously. They're trying to touch us in places that store wisdom and knowledge that we have, that we've carried through time. I think they remind us that we're not alone, that we are a part of a community, but only a very small part, and we are not the know-all, end-all. We're not the master race by any means, and so I think